My name is Aurora Lane. My wedding day was supposed to be the happiest moment. Sunlight shimmering on the riverside church, hundreds of guests holding their breath as I prepared to say my vows. But just as I held the groom's hand, my childhood best friend, Brielle, suddenly stood up and shouted, "I'm pregnant with Mason's baby." The whispers rose like a storm, every gaze turning toward me. Everyone waited for me to collapse. But instead of crying, I smiled and signaled the band to stop playing. As no one knew, I had been preparing for this moment all along. What would you do if, on your wedding day, the friend you trusted most stabbed you in the back? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit like and subscribe to stay with me. Now, let me tell you the truth behind that so-called dream wedding. If anyone asks why I could stand calm in the moment when my whole life seemed to shatter, the answer begins with the months I spent in the small hospital where I worked as a NICU nurse. Night shifts in the neonatal unit were usually quiet, with only the steady rhythm of ventilators keeping fragile lives tethered to this world. It was there that I met Mason Hale. He arrived in a tailored suit with staff from his family's company, Hale Care, delivering 2 new ventilators. They wanted to donate them as part of a charity founded by his mother, Eleanor. I remember the moment Mason bent over to look at a newborn struggling for breath, his face flickering with emotion. I thought, maybe he really is one of the rare wealthy people who genuinely care. But life is rarely as simple as it looks. When Mason proposed, his family immediately imposed a condition, a prenuptial agreement. Eleanor handed me the thick document, her voice firm. "This isn't for you, Aurora. It's to protect our company. Do you understand?" I looked at Mason, hoping he would speak. He only squeezed my hand lightly, avoiding my eyes. I nodded. I didn't care about money. I believed if love was real, no contract could change it. So I signed. And I trusted. But numbers don't lie. In my role managing hospital support funds, I often reviewed donation records. One evening after a tiring shift, I compared Hale Foundation's pledged donations with the hospital's actual accounts. The numbers didn't match. A few thousand missing, then tens of thousands. At first I thought it was a banking error. But the more I checked, the clearer the gap became. And one new name kept appearing: Shoreline Logistics, a company I'd never heard of, but at the same address as the Hale's old warehouse on the outskirts of Charleston. I wrote everything down in a small notebook. Dates, amounts, details. I told no one. Part of me believed if it was a mistake, it would soon be fixed. Part of me wanted to believe Mason wasn't involved. Meanwhile, Brielle Carter, my best friend since college, stood by me organizing fundraisers. She was lively, persuasive, the perfect balance to my quiet hospital world. At galas, Brielle always knew how to charm donors. I was grateful for her help during those busy times. But then I started noticing looks that lingered too long. At last year's spring gala, I saw Brielle and Mason in a corner, heads tilted close, laughing softly. When I approached, they startled and quickly switched the topic to stage decorations. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being too sensitive. But by the third time, the intimacy in their gestures was hard to ignore. One evening, after a planning meeting, I returned to grab my forgotten purse. The office lights were dim and I heard familiar laughter. My steps froze in the hallway. Mason and Brielle sat close, laptop screen glowing with donor lists. "Don't worry, a few adjustments and no one will ever notice," Brielle whispered. "But Aurora," Mason hesitated. "She trusts you completely. Leave it to me." They didn't see me. I quietly turned away, my heart pounding with pain and confusion. I couldn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I did the only thing I knew. I kept recording. I wrote down the date, time, setting, even their words. I saved copies of every email from the foundation. I secretly printed account statements. I gathered everything as if it were a medical file, one that could decide life or death. Weeks later, Brielle invited me to her new apartment. A luxury high-rise, furnished with modern pieces, far beyond the means of a PR consultant who often complained about credit card debt. I smiled and complimented her, but inside I made a note. Who paid for this? I realized I was living in 2 worlds. One was the hospital, where every number meant a child's life. The other was the glittering illusion of galas and donations, where numbers could be twisted into tools. And Mason, the man I loved, stood at the fragile line between them. Some nights he came home late, wine still on his shirt. He said he was at donor meetings. but his tie carried a perfume that wasn't mine. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself, maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe love means patience. Yet my notebook grew thicker. And inside me, fear grew heavier. Because I knew if what I saw was true, then it wasn't only my love being betrayed, it was the lives of the children I had sworn to protect. The summer gala sparkled with crystal chandeliers and clinking glasses. I sat at the hospital staff's table, excited as the big screen prepared to show the thank you video we had filmed. We'd captured real moments, tiny hands gripping tubes, a little girl smiling after heart surgery, a boy's giggle when the oxygen line was removed. I believed that once donors saw those faces, they'd know every dollar was worth it. But when the music began, the screen showed not the children, but a glossy commercial for Hale Care. The logo flashed bright, a voice droned, leading medical technology, the Hale family legacy. A few donors stopped clapping, exchanging uneasy glances. Smith, who had donated hundreds of thousands for preemie incubators, shook his head, eyes down. His wife sighed, face heavy with disappointment. It felt like a bucket of ice water poured over me. My chest pounded. I turned to Mason, whispering through clenched teeth, "Where's the hospital video? I sent it to Brielle last week." He bit his lip, placed a hand on my shoulder, forced a smile. "Probably a technical error." "Don't worry, sweetheart. Don't worry." I looked around at the donors' stares. Promises to patients and families had evaporated in minutes. The gala dragged on heavy. As guests left, I slipped backstage. On the wooden table lay a stack of freshly printed receipts. I picked one up, still warm. The words leapt out: operational management fees, transferred to Hale Foundation. And beneath it, forwarded to Shoreline Logistics. That name again. Shoreline Logistics. The shell company from the files. My stomach twisted. The scattered doubts were knitting into a terrifying shape. The next morning, as I ended my shift, Dr. Naomi Brooks called me into her office. She set a folder before me, her face grave. "Aurora, you need to know this." "What is it?" My voice trembled. "Caleb's bone marrow transplant was cancelled." "No. The fund was supposed to cover it." Brooks shook her head, eyes glistening. "The money that should have reached the hospital was on hold. They said pending paperwork. Caleb can't wait. His blood type is rare. This chance comes once." My hands shook over the file. The dry numbers weren't abstract anymore. They were tied to a child's breath. And now, because someone siphoned money, he had lost his chance to live. That night, I drove to the outskirts of Charleston. The road was empty, trees casting shadows under broken streetlights. My destination was the old Hale property, now abandoned, once used as a warehouse. An anonymous text had arrived days earlier. "Want to know where the money goes? Go to the old warehouse." The heavy wooden door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside was damp and dim, the smell of mildew mixed with metal. I felt my way through the long hallway, the beam of my phone's flashlight guiding each step. And then I stopped. In front of me was a reinforced steel door, and beneath it, stairs leading down to a basement. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The room that appeared made me shiver. This wasn't an ordinary basement. It was a panic room converted into a data vault. On the shelves were dozens of numbered file boxes. On the table, an industrial scanner hummed, its screen displaying donor lists with notes marked "fee adjustments." This was the data transfer hub, the place where money was being washed through falsified documents. I pulled out my phone, trembling, and snapped a picture. But at that very moment, a strange sound echoed. I hurried to hide behind a shelf of files. The sharp rhythm of high heels struck the concrete floor. The faint glow of an old security camera flickered. I glanced at the monitor and my heart nearly stopped. 2 figures entered. One was Brielle, my best friend, my maid of honor. The other was Eleanor Hale, Mason's mother. They dropped 2 thick files onto the table. On the front cover, a name stood in bold: Aurora Lane. I bit my lip hard to keep from crying out. "Make sure this signature matches. When the time comes, we'll submit it to court. She won't have time to react." Eleanor's voice rasped, cold and merciless. "Don't worry." Brielle smirked, lips curling. "Aurora trusts me completely. When it all blows up, she'll look like nothing but a greedy nurse exploiting donations." I slumped back against the icy wall, my whole body shaking. Each word was like a knife driven into my chest. In that instant, everything fell into place. The strange looks at the gala. The discrepancies in the accounts. Brielle's luxury apartment. Mason's late nights. The last piece of the puzzle clicked. They weren't only stealing funds. They were preparing to frame me. I clutched my phone tight, torn between fury and despair. My name sat on that folder, prepared to destroy me in an instant. And as Eleanor and Brielle discussed the right time to release the files, I knew my life would never be safe again. In the shadows, my hands clenched until they bled. I had no choice but to turn this pain into a weapon. The next morning, before I could even finish my coffee, my phone buzzed non-stop. Text after text from the bank. Your account has been flagged. Suspicious transactions detected from Shoreline Logistics. Shoreline, that cursed name again. But this time linked to my personal account. I opened the statement, my vision blurring as I saw a deposit marked patient expense reimbursement. I knew exactly what it was. The money I had fronted from my own pocket to cover a little girl's medical costs when the fund was delayed. I still had the original receipt, the hospital's confirmation. But on paper, the transaction was staged to look like I was receiving money from the shell company. I rushed to the hospital to find Dr. Brooks. She opened her laptop, frowning at the statement. This is clearly what you advanced. We have paperwork to prove it, she said firmly. I nodded, but my voice shook. What if they arrange it so the evidence becomes my crime? What if this was all set up to trap me? Brooks placed a hand on my shoulder. You need to stay calm. The most important thing now is to keep every document, every receipt, every statement intact. Don't lose a single piece. But I had no idea that even as I clung to that stack of papers, another blade was already at my back. That evening, Mason returned to the apartment. His eyes were cold, nothing like the tenderness I once knew. He tossed a printout onto the table, his voice flat. Brielle showed me this. He says, you've been pocketing donation money. Aurora, is it true? My whole body stiffened. I stared at the paper. It was the altered statement, the real numbers twisted into false evidence. You think I could do that? My voice cracked. Every dollar I managed, I recorded. You know better than anyone, I was the one staying up nights with every file. Mason crossed his arms, avoiding my eyes. I don't know who to believe anymore. Maybe we should postpone the wedding. The words hit like a stone. I tried to hold on to a shred of hope. Mason, please, trust me. I have documents to prove it. Just give me a chance to. But footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door opened and Eleanor walked in, her presence commanding, her heavy perfume choking the air. No, she cut me off, eyes sharp as blades. This wedding will go on. Hale Care's shareholders need stability. We can't let rumors tarnish the company's image. To them, I was no longer a woman to be loved. I was a pawn. The days that followed were a storm of rumors. Someone leaked Aurora embezzled charity funds, to friends and colleagues. My phone flooded with anonymous texts. Greed has consequences. Even my family in Greenville was pulled into the chaos. One night my mother called, her voice trembling. Aurora, someone anonymous called the house. They said, if you don't stay quiet, our family will suffer. What are you mixed up in? I tried to calm her, but when I hung up, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I knew they wanted me to take the fall. Friends drifted away. People who once eagerly shared our fundraisers now avoided eye contact at the hospital. I walked the long halls alone, my rubber soles echoing like a reminder that I had no one left. Except two. Sister Mary Isabel, the nun at the community center where I volunteered, and Dr. Brooks. One afternoon, I went to the small riverside chapel where Sister Mary lit candles for sick children. Warm light glowed across her face as she listened to me pour out everything, from missing funds and forged papers to Mason's cold stare. She placed her hand over mine and spoke gently. You know, darkness only wins if you fear it. If you keep walking, the light will come. Her words were like a candle flaring inside me, even as the storm raged on. Brooks didn't leave me either. One night she knocked on my door, clutching a stack of files. I did some extra comparisons, she said, flipping open side-by-side ledgers of the foundation and hospital. Funds disappeared the moment they hit Hale Foundation's account, then moved to Shoreline. This can't be a mistake. Her eyes held resolve. You're not alone, Aurora. But you need stronger proof. The next day, when I was nearly breaking under the weight of fear, an anonymous package appeared at my door. A worn brown box, no sender's name. I carefully opened it. Inside was a small hard drive with a handwritten note. Truth needs courage. Don't let them win. My hands shook as I plugged it in. The screen lit up with scans, ledgers detailing every siphoned dollar. And then another folder marked audio. I clicked. My headphones filled with a familiar, chilling laugh. Brielle's voice echoed. As long as we pin it all on Aurora, we're clean. Everyone will believe it. She's just a nurse, she can't fight the Hale family. I dropped my hands from the keyboard, my heart exploding in my chest. My worst fears weren't suspicions anymore. This was proof. Proof that my best friend and the family of the man I was to marry were preparing to destroy me. The pale blue light of the screen washed over my face in the dark room. I sat frozen, replaying the recording, letting the pain sink to the bone. But beneath it, another fire was sparking. They could try to make me the thief. But now I held the one thing that could change everything. I sat alone in the dark apartment, the glow of my laptop reflecting on my face. The anonymous hard drive lay on the table like a ticking bomb. I pulled out a blank sheet of paper and wrote 4 words. Chain of custody. It was the rule I'd learned in the NICU. Everything must be logged, everything recorded so no one could dispute it. A vial of blood, a dose of medicine, or a piece of evidence. It all required absolute transparency. I started with the ledger. I photographed every page, saved files as PDFs with time-stamped metadata. Then I compared the watermarks. The ink smeared in places, but along the right edge were faint streaks from an old HP printer. I checked Hale Foundation's asset list. Sure enough, they had one at the warehouse. Next, I traced the power logs. From the utility company's records, I obtained data on unusual power surges at that address. And there it was. The scanner's operating hours matched perfectly with the timestamps from the camera I'd once seen. The chain of connections was forming. Brooks was the next person I went to. I played her a clip from the audio file. Brielle's voice rang out, bright but razor sharp. As long as we extract the lists, we'll have hundreds of patients to solicit. Who could verify all of them? Brooks frowned. I remember now. Last month, the lab got an email from Brielle asking for a temporary system password to check records. It struck me as odd, but she handed me a business card and said Mason had authorized it. I never imagined. I nodded, my hands ice cold. You unintentionally handed them the key. They copied real patient data and then created a fake fundraising campaign. Brooks slammed her hand on the desk, her voice catching. I can't believe I let myself be used like that. I squeezed her hand gently. No one blames you. Without your memory of that, I wouldn't have connected this piece. Your confirmation will become crucial evidence. In the nights that followed, I lived like a nurse tending the most critical case. Meticulous, disciplined, allowing no mistakes. I organized every file, numbered them, and noted the date and time of discovery. The anonymous hard drive, the ledger, the audio, Brooks's forwarded email, the power logs, the bank statements. Everything was sealed onto 2 separate USBs, placed in sealed envelopes, signed with my name and clearly dated. In my notebook, I recorded each step. Who touched it, when, stored where. I worked as if I were a forensic technician, not just a nurse. Because I knew, with a single gap, they would twist it all and turn me into the liar. When everything was stable enough, I prepared a concise summary listing the links among the Hale Foundation, Shoreline Logistics, and the forged files. I sent a secure email to Detective Quinn, a police officer Dr. Brooks trusted. In the email I wrote, "Please don't act yet. I need you to wait until the wedding day. Then all witnesses will be present and no one will have a way to deny it." That night, I sat by the window, the river wind cutting cold. I planned to cancel the wedding. That thought felt like the only exit when Mason no longer believed me and my name had been turned into a joke in the medical community. I picked up my phone and opened the drafted text to Mason. "We stop here. I can't go on." My finger hovered over send, trembling. The chapel bell rang. I threw on a coat and went to see Sister Mary. She was stacking candles, the small flames lighting her kind face. I unable to hide my tears. I can't take this anymore. I want to cancel everything. They've made me a greedy woman in everyone's eyes. What is there left to hold on to? Sister Mary looked straight at me, her eyes calm as a lake. You don't need to win a man. You don't need to win a family. What you need to do, Aurora, is return the truth to the children who were robbed of their chance to live. I was stunned. Each word seemed to touch the deepest place. But what if I fail? I asked, my voice hoarse. Then at least you stood on the side of truth. And truth has a way of protecting itself. I sat in the chapel for a long time, listening to the wind slip through the window frame. Inside me the fear was still there, but beside it something new was rising: resolve. I wiped my tears and nodded slightly. As I stepped outside, I opened my phone and deleted the message to Mason. The wedding would not be cancelled. But it would no longer be the day that chained my life to a rotten family. It would be the day the lights turned on and everything they hid was exposed. 3 days before the wedding, I received a brief call from Eleanor. Her voice was flat, neither high nor low, but enough to chill my spine. Aurora, we need to meet privately. We shouldn't let Mason or Brielle interfere. We met at a cafe inside a downtown hotel, where the warm yellow lights could mask the tension. Eleanor was already waiting in an ash-gray Chanel coat, silver hair neatly pinned. In front of her sat a thick envelope sealed with red wax. She slid the envelope toward me, her eyes as cold as steel. This is a non-disclosure agreement. If you sign it, the Hale Foundation will immediately clear the hospital's debts. Caleb's case and the other children's cases will no longer be delayed. I went numb. Those small lives were once again placed on the scale like bargaining chips. Seeing my wavering look, Eleanor pressed on. In return, you'll still marry Mason and maintain the family's image in front of shareholders and the public. After the wedding, things will stay quiet. Everyone benefits. I took a deep breath and pulled the document from the envelope. The dense lines of text were like a spider's web. At first, the clauses about confidentiality and protecting organizational image seemed harmless. But as my eyes moved down to the small print appendix, a cold shiver ran along my spine. In the event of a media crisis or legal investigation, the fundraising coordinator, Aurora Lane, as the lawful wife of Mason Hale, will bear full civil liability. I set the paper down. So, if everything blows up, I'm the one who takes the fall? She didn't blink, her voice dry. Someone has to be responsible. You have medical credentials and a reputation as a devoted nurse. People will believe you made mistakes out of greed. Hale Care must stand firm. That is bigger than an individual. I forced a smile, hiding my shaking hands under the table. I understand. So you want me to sign right now? Eleanor shook her head slightly. During the wedding. In front of witnesses. As a ritual to guarantee loyalty. In that case, I'll need a hard copy. I want to be fully prepared so nothing goes wrong on the big day. That was when the plan in my head began to click into place. I remembered what Dr. Brooks had told me the day before when she handed me a special ink. This ink shows up under UV light. And this paper preserves fingerprints clearly. If anyone else touches it, it will leave traces that can't be denied. I feigned meticulousness, asking Eleanor to sign a few places in advance for notarization prep. She frowned but signed anyway. I knew each fingerprint and pen stroke would be a tightening loop around her when the time came. The meeting ended in silence. Eleanor walked away, her heels striking firm beats on the marble floor. I stayed seated, heart pounding, gripping the envelope. The cafe was full of the smell of roasted coffee, but to me the scent of paper and ink was stronger than gun smoke. That night, after I locked the agreement away, my phone buzzed. A message from Brielle. Aurora, get ready. At the wedding, I have big news to announce. News that will make sure no one ever forgets that day. I read the line over and over, my chest tightening. Big news. With Brielle, her joy had never been mine. I knew she wouldn't stop at stealing Mason. There would be another performance, carefully staged, poised to explode right at the altar. I set the phone down, the screen going dark, leaving the room in shadow. In that darkness, I knew the game had reached its final round. And I had to be ready to flip it the moment they believed victory was theirs. Soft music drifted through the church, the string ensemble sustaining a familiar classical harmony. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, scattering bright patches across the white petals lining the aisle. The dress hugged my figure, the train fanning out like waves, but my heart no longer fluttered with a bride's excitement. It pounded beat by beat like a war drum. At the altar, Mason held himself tense, gaze refusing to meet mine. Up front, Eleanor folded her hands and ruled the room with a single look. And Brielle, maid of honor, my friend since childhood, stood beside Mason, her mouth tilted in a smile I knew too well. As the minister prepared to read the vows, Brielle suddenly stepped before the altar, her voice ringing through the sacred space. Sorry, but I can't stay silent any longer. I'm pregnant, and it's Mason's child. The murmur burst like a wave shattering a still lake. Some guests covered their mouths, others turned to whisper. I clearly heard my grandmother whisper a prayer in Spanish, the rosary clicking in her hands. I stepped forward, my voice steady. Thank you, Brielle. But if you've chosen truth to begin with, then let me finish it. I signaled to the sound technician. The auxiliary screen behind the altar, originally set to show our memories, flared to life. It wasn't footage of us holding hands on the beach or smiling at our engagement party, but a cold timeline. A photo of the contract signed with the Hale Foundation. Next came the scanned ledger, each column of numbers, each management fee. After that were images of documents showing transfers to Shoreline Logistics, the shell company. And finally, a consulting services payment under the name Brielle Oscar PR. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Brielle turned pale. You made this up. I pressed the button. Sound filled the church, Brielle's voice clear and cold. As long as we pin it all on Aurora, we're clean. Everyone will believe a lowly nurse is greedy. Then came Eleanor's voice. Right. When needed, we'll release the files. She won't have time to react. All eyes shifted to Eleanor, then back to Brielle. That I stepped to the lectern and pulled an envelope from my bridal bouquet. This is the non-disclosure agreement Eleanor gave me. The UV light clicked on. On the big screen, the scan showed Eleanor's signature and fingerprints in stark detail. There was no room to deny it. Brielle trembled, still grasping for a lifeline. I'm still pregnant. That's the biggest proof. Brooks, already seated in the middle row, stood. She raised a rapid test kit and spoke firmly. Brielle, you said you're 10 weeks along. We can test right here so there's no doubt. The room rippled. Under the pressure of hundreds of eyes, Brielle reluctantly stepped forward. Brooks moved quickly with practiced hands. A few minutes later, the result appeared on the test strip. Negative. The church exploded. Murmurs crashed like a storm. A doctor nearby whispered, she's reacting to hormones from a patch, the kind sold online to fake pregnancy symptoms. I held up a paper bag containing the receipt for that patch. Online purchase proof, recipient name, Brielle Oscar. Brielle collapsed into a pew, face drained of color. Right then, the church doors swung open. Detective Quinn entered with 2 uniformed officers. His voice rang out, steady. By court order, the Hale Foundation is hereby sealed. We will also search the warehouse facility, also known as the panic room, belonging to the Hale family. Eleanor shot to her feet, then her knees buckled. Mason gripped the altar, lips moving without sound. His eyes met mine. There was no defense left, no explanation, only the emptiness of a man who had lost everything. The months I'd been cornered, labeled a thief, isolated, were now reversed. And before hundreds of witnesses, the truth stood exposed, undeniable. The cold basement behind the old Hale house reeked of damp and old paper. The sweep of flashlights lit steel shelves stacked with boxes of files. Detective Quinn, gloved, and 2 officers searched a cabinet with an electronic lock. After a few steps, a click sounded and the safe door swung open. Inside were not only financial ledgers as expected but also a folder marked in red. IVF consent forms. My heart stabbed when I saw my name printed on a medical consent. Aurora Lane, Quinn read aloud, signs to consent to embryo retrieval. I reeled. I had never signed. I had never stepped into any IVF clinic. Standing beside me, dear. Brooks snapped photos of each page, her eyes darkening. These are altered scans. Look at the handwriting, dates, ink. None of it matches. Whoever did this was meticulous, but they still left evidence of layer overlays. In a flash, 1,000 thoughts tore through me. If the truth hadn't come out today, they could have used these files at any moment to destroy my name and career. Quinn looked up, voice low. I'll enter this file set into evidence. But clearly, this is a fabricated product designed to build a false narrative. Brooks squeezed my hand and explained for everyone, no embryos were retrieved, no patients are involved. This is a trap meant to force Aurora to take the blame, if needed. I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. The pain still burned, betrayal not only in love but in the plan to use my identity to launder their filth. Yet in that heavy air I chose another path. When Mason was brought in, his face was ashen, his eyes frantic. I looked straight at him, my voice steady and no longer shaking. Mason, I won't press charges against you for the IVF file. I believe Brielle and Eleanor created it. But you will leave the company, remove your name from the foundation, and stand before the community to apologize for what you allowed to happen. Mason opened his mouth, then closed it. He nodded, each nod heavy, like a man who finally understood there was nothing left to defend. Eleanor leaned against the wall, her shoulders quivering. The woman who once held a boardroom in her palm was now an empty shell. Face, she muttered, her voice cracking. Everything I did was to save face. I looked at her and felt no hatred, only hollow emptiness. For that so-called face, children had been stripped of their chance to live. I turned to the reporters, to the patient families gathered outside after hearing the foundation was frozen. Gaunt faces, clear eyes of children looked at me through glass, waiting for an answer. I spoke sure and clear. Your children's money will go back to your children. Not a single cent will be taken again. A mother burst into tears, clutching her baby. A father squeezed the shoulder of his son within 4, whispering something into his ear. In that moment, the silence shattered into trust. Detective Quinn closed his notebook and signaled the officers to seal the safe. Red seals were pressed on. The tape tore with a dry rip, like closing a dark chapter. I stood still, my hands still trembling, but this time not from fear. It was the tremor of someone who had finally said what should have been said long ago. In the dim light of the basement, Mason stared at the floor, Eleanor sank into a wooden chair and Brielle, handcuffed, sobbed in silence. And I knew I had crossed the last line, letting go of those who betrayed me while holding fast to the truth and to the children I held in my arms every day. In the months after that broken wedding, Charleston no longer saw me as a suspect. In local headlines, my name appeared with the word whistleblower, the one who stood up and protected the hospital fund's integrity. The formal investigations stretched through the fall. Brielle and Eleanor were indicted for financial fraud and falsifying records. Mason faced no criminal charges, but the board forced him to resign from all positions. I heard he left the office quietly, avoiding the press. One day, a police department attorney came to see me. He handed me an envelope bearing the state seal, explaining that under whistleblower law, I would receive a percentage award from the recovered funds. I sat a long time with the paperwork in my hands. The amount was enough to buy a new home or leave Charleston for good. But in my heart I knew that money wasn't mine. The next day I went to the small chapel where Sister Mary lights candles each morning. I set the envelope on the wooden table. I can't keep this. I want it to go where it's meant to go. Brooks looked at me, eyes brimming. We talked it through and decided. Create a new hospital fund, co-managed by Sister Mary and Dr. Brooks themselves. We named it the Warm Beginnings Fund. All income and expenses would be published online, statements open for the community to track. I wanted the parents of every child to see exactly how every dollar they entrusted became ventilators, neonatal beds, or meal stipends for patients. On the day of the announcement, I stood with Sister Mary and Dr. Brooks before hundreds of families of sick children. When the big screen lit up with the words transparency, 100%, applause filled the hall. I knew that at last I had brought the money back where it belonged, into the arms of the children. I left Charleston for a short time. I enrolled in an advanced course on neonatal care at a medical center in Atlanta. During clinicals, I held preemies no bigger than my hand, learned how to use microventilators, practiced skin-to-skin techniques. I felt reminded of why I chose this profession in the first place. Not to survive in the politics of a foundation, but to preserve each fragile breath lighter than morning mist. When I returned, I began building the Warm Beginnings program. It wasn't only fundraising but an entire support network. We bought modern breast pumps for mothers without resources, donated safe cribs to low-income families, opened parenting classes on infant care. At the first session, when I saw a young father trembling as he held his 3-day-old baby, I knew in that moment that all my pain had meaning. Just as things were settling, I received a hand-delivered envelope with no sender's name. Inside was a handwritten letter and a thick stack of documents. The letter was brief. "Aurora, I was wrong. I didn't have the courage to stand with you when the truth was twisted. This is what I can do to make it right. Jace." Jace, the IT engineer from Hale's company, the one I had often seen quietly slipping away from noisy meetings. Inside the packet were the real price lists for medical equipment, with detailed notes on inflated commissions. He even added guidance. "Use this set to negotiate. Don't let anyone take what belongs to the hospital." My hands shook as I turned each page. Sometimes redemption doesn't come from the loudest voices, but from those who quietly recognize their mistakes and choose to send the light back. That evening I sat with Dr. Brooks and the hospital board to compare every detail. The results were exactly as Jace had written. Buying at the true cost would save us tens of thousands of dollars every year. That money could become more warm beds, more nursing staff, more chances at life. I smiled faintly. "Thank you, Jace. This apology saved more lives than any words ever could." I looking down at parents pushing strollers across the hospital courtyard. From ruins, something new had been built. The small community house on a Charleston corner had been renovated from an old warehouse. On opening day, I stood silently before the freshly painted brick wall, where a brass plaque listed the names of donors. No more powerful financial names, no flashy Hale Foundation logo, but a long list of ordinary people. A grocery shop owner, a mechanic, night shift nurses pooling their modest wages. I reached out and touched the line, "Mrs. Thompson, $25. The elderly flower seller near the hospital, who brought a white daisy every day to the prayer room. Something inside me softened and strengthened at the same time. Sister Mary approached, her thin but steady hand placing a tiny brass bell into mine. Tarnished with age but still ringing pure. "Aurora," she said softly, "when you ring this bell, it's not to call for rescue, but to remind yourself that you saved yourself." I looked at her, tears rising. The bell wasn't heavy, but when I held it, it felt as though it carried the whole path I had walked. From the days I was called a thief, to the moment I stood before hundreds defending the truth. That afternoon I never expected Mason to appear. He wore a simple shirt, no longer the man striding through boardrooms. In his hand was a thick envelope. He handed it to me before the eyes of reporters and families. "This is my public apology," his voice hoarse. "I let the woman I loved fall into a hell of doubt and I was blind to the truth. I'm transferring all of my personal shares to the Children's Fund. I hope it makes up in some way. No hatred, no expectation." I nodded, saying little. He bowed, stepped back, leaving me to walk my own path. No grudge, but no return. Evening fell. I entered the new NICU of the community house, where warmers had been installed with the refunded money. A newborn lay quietly in an incubator, skin still pale but breathing steady. I lifted the baby gently, pressing him to my chest. His dark eyes opened, reflecting the dim light of sunset. Outside the window, Charleston's sky burned red, the last rays of the day spilling down like shimmering silk. I stood still, letting the tiny breath in my arms merge with my heartbeat. My voice rose, gentle yet resolute, like a vow spoken only to myself and the lives I protect. The wedding ended, but the vow I keep to the end: life before reputation. In that moment, I knew I had found a true home, not the Hale mansion, but a place where children's cries echoed, where mothers' hands gripped mine, and where truth had finally returned to its rightful place. You see, every story doesn't just end with what happened, but opens into the thoughts each of us carries. If it were you standing in my place, would you choose forgiveness or would you walk away from the start? Do you think Mason deserves a second chance, or was signing over his shares the final way to close the past? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear your feelings and experiences, because sometimes your answer could be the strength someone lost in their own life needs. And if you feel connected, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories. I'll share more journeys about family, betrayal, and new beginnings where each of us can see a reflection of ourselves. See you in the next story, where together we keep listening, reflecting, and finding the strength to live more